in my 20s and that time of, everything's ahead of you and the potential and what's the future hold, that kind of thing.
Here's one that's almost borders on mysterious, and that is you would, and Kelly writes about this, people turning up when they said they would. So you plan for something in 5 days' time, meet you outside that phone box, and without a word of a lie, they'd be there.
Yeah. You can recreate that experience right now if you want to.
All right.
Just leave your phone at home.
Happy Easter, everyone. That's the panel. Nick Bazan, James O'Keefe, thank you very much. That's the panel for another week. See you Tuesday.
Whakarongo mai koe kei te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei. The wife of an injured Auckland port worker calls BS over management's claims it was ignorant to serious safety failings. Sir Ron Brierley's new title, convicted sex offender, so should he lose the old honorific? Calls to halt the deportation of Chinese construction workers allegedly caught in a human trafficking ring. The net widens for emergency spots in MIQ. And speaking of MIQ, we've checked on the menu for Easter at the country's isolation hotels. And can the Easter Bunny bounce by? Christchurch is benched for the FIFA Women's World Cup. And how much would you pay for a piece of the All Blacks? $20, $50? And what would you want in return?
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. A Wellington High School has started removing all signage with the name of old boy Sir Ron Brierley after the disgraced businessman pleaded guilty to possessing child sex abuse material today. The high-profile tycoon, who's 83, admitted 3 charges this morning in a Sydney court, while a further 14 charges were withdrawn. Ruth Hill reports.
In a statement to RNZ, Wellington College's board chair, Paul Retimanu, says the school began removing all signage referring to Sir Ron following confirmation of his guilty plea. Sir Ron has been a generous benefactor to his former school, which has a Brierley theatre and a Sir Ron Brierley turf. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has also begun moves to strip him of his knighthood. Sir Ron has been out on bail since he was first arrested in December 2019 at Sydney Airport after an anonymous tip-off. According to court documents, his laptop and other devices allegedly contained 200,000 images, videos and stories depicting child abuse. Kore Filtine.
Managed isolation and quarantine says hundreds of vouchers it released for the coming weeks have been quickly snaffled up. For the first time in months, people flying into the country have had a number of dates to choose from throughout April, June and July. They've previously had to book as far as 3 months ahead, with some spending hours sifting through the booking website for any cancellations. Authorities haven't been able to say exactly why the spaces became available. Deputy Chief Executive of MIQ, Megan Main, says the situation changes quickly and there's now just a little bit of availability in June and July. An MP says a group of Chinese men facing deportation back home have not been given access to an interpreter by corrections. 10 men are in facilities pending deportation, 9 of them in Mount Eden jail. Officials say they were working illegally at construction sites in Auckland. Green MP Ricardo Menendez-March, who was among a delegation to visit the men today, says they are stressed and he wants an urgent investigation.
What we're calling for and what I will be writing to the Minister for is for the Minister to set a directive to stop the deportation so that they can carry out a fulsome investigation so that they can get answers on how is it that the 9 men were able to obtain visitor visas.
Ricardo Menendez-March, Corrections and the Minister Calvin Davis have been approached for comment. 11 people are in a stable condition in hospital after a chemical spill at an Upper Hutt pool. Emergency services were called to H2O Extreme at about 2 this afternoon, where 15 people had moderate to mild injuries. Fire and Emergency says they were struggling to breathe, which indicates a chemical spill. However, there was no obvious leak. One of Taranaki's big industrial players, Methanex, has confirmed 75 jobs will be lost after its decision to close one of its plants. The methanol producer decided to mothball its Waitara Valley plant in February, citing an inability to secure gas supply. At the time, it said it would retain some activities at the site, such as truck loading to supply the local market. New Plymouth Mayor Neil Holdham says Methanex generates $800 million a year in export earnings and makes up 10% of the local economy.
And they're really high-skilled people. They're with good, high-paying jobs, and we'll be doing what we can, working with MSD and some of the other sector participants to see if we can, how we can support those families.
New Plymouth Mayor Neil Holdham. The living wage rate will rise to $22.75 per hour from September. Living Wage Aotearoa says the 3% increase is based on the average annual earnings movement in the last June quarter. There are more than 200 accredited living wage employers. It's 4 minutes past 5. The All Blacks captain Sam Cane will be sidelined for up to 6 months following surgery after suffering a chest muscle injury. Cane will have surgery next week and miss the remainder of the Super Rugby Aotearoa season for the Chiefs and part of the All Blacks season. He suffered the injury in the Chiefs' win over the Blues last weekend. Christchurch football is reeling from the snub from the sports world governing body FIFA after the city missed out on matches for the 2023 Women's Football World Cup. New Zealand and Australia are co-hosting the tournament, with FIFA today announcing the 9 cities which will host games. Auckland's Eden Park will host the tournament opener, while Dunedin, Wellington and Hamilton also get games. The final will be played in Sydney. FIFA says the Christchurch Stadium isn't up to standard, and Mainland Football Chief Executive Julian Bowden says not getting games is a major blow.
It'll be tough on the football community here. It means we're obviously going to have to get on planes and trains and cars and go and watch games in other parts of the country. So, yeah, it is disappointing.
Mainland Football's Julian Bowden. The weather could stop the White Ferns in their bid for a rare series win over Australia. A reduced 13-over per side match got underway at Eden Park, with Australia getting through to 14 for 1 in the third over before the players were forced from the field due to rain. That's the news.
Low-wage workers share their struggles.
We're starting to have just 8 hours and then come back home and spend time with our family.
Auckland Light Rail goes back to the drawing board.
We will not have seen a project of this scale in New Zealand.
And COVID star Susie Wiles is named New Zealander of the Year.
Of all years, I think this is the year that the team of 5 million should have won it, when it's an effort that took so many people.
The A-Team. Morning reports, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Metsuvis till midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Showers spreading south today, some possibly heavy and thundery, then becoming partly cloudy early tomorrow. Waitomo to Manawatu, including central high country, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Mostly cloudy with a few showers, some possibly heavy and thundery, clearing to fine tomorrow morning. However, rain developing tomorrow night. Horowhenua to Wellington and Wairarapa, cloudy periods, rain developing tomorrow afternoon. Nelson and Marlborough, cloudy periods with isolated showers about the ranges, scattered rain tomorrow night. Canterbury, mainly fine tonight, rain developing tomorrow morning, then easing by tomorrow night. Bulla to Fiordland, including Otago and Southland, fine, but cloud and rain developing in Fiordland tonight, spreading northwards tomorrow before easing to isolated showers by the evening. Chatham Islands, rain with thunderstorms possible, easing to a few showers tonight, but rain returning tomorrow night. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The wife of an injured Ports of Auckland worker is furious about management's claims they were unaware of the extent of health and safety failings revealed this week in a highly critical report. Following 3 deaths linked to the port, Mayor Phil Goff ordered the independent review. It's found systemic safety failings and suspects underreporting of accidents, and some workers fear speaking up. Ports of Auckland CEO Tony Gibson maintains he wasn't aware things were so bad and is refusing to resign despite growing calls for him to walk. In 2015, the port was fined $55,000 in order to pay $25,000 in compensation after failing to ensure the safety of a worker who was badly injured in an accident on the job. January 22nd, 2014. Senior stevedore Neil Bower is on the job at Auckland Ports. His big boss was and still is CEO Tony Gibson. Neil's standing on the deck of a ship, gearing up to unload freight containers. Basically, he's using a special pole about 5 metres long, stretching up 2 to 3 containers high to unlock their bindings, and at the same time trying to hold steady. He lost his balance. What happened next is best described in a judge's notes at the port's sentencing.
He fell off the deck of the boat and into the water below, and, of course, in that fall, also hitting objects and sustaining quite considerable injuries. He was in the water for 15 minutes, rescued and then hospitalised. He sustained multiple fractures to his body, his legs, tibia and fibula, his upper right femur, fractured vertebrae, fractured ribs, sternum, lacerated lungs and tendon injuries, just to briefly name the main injuries. He was hospitalised for 3 months and continues now in recovery to suffer the ongoing effects of such major injuries.
There should have been a safety rail. There wasn't. There should have been a specially designed crane-lifted safety cage in use. There wasn't. The setup passed a pre-work safety inspection. It shouldn't have. The port knew it stuffed up. The sentencing notes say so.
Ports of Auckland has frankly and candidly accepted the failures.
Minutes from a restorative justice session held almost a year after the accident clearly show Neil Bower was reluctant to speak freely, to raise any issues, because he feared, quote, that might be held against him. A port manager assured him that wouldn't happen. The official meeting notes also say the port guaranteed Neil Bower employment and the accident would not affect his employment status. Fast forward to this week's damning report and the litany of shortcomings it details, including systemic failings in health and safety, with suspected underreporting of accidents and fear of speaking up. Ports of Auckland CEO Tony Gibson fronted up at a media conference and expressed his shock at the findings, insisting he had no idea things were this bad.
I didn't know about them, and that's a sad indictment on the way we actually operate here.
In 2017, with the 3rd anniversary of Neil Bower's life-changing accident approaching, his wife, Jo, emailed Tony Gibson, CEO. She detailed her husband's ongoing struggles as a result of the accident, notes he's up to operation number 17 and raises concerns about how he's being treated by the port. And then this critical paragraph.
Neil is aghast at the unsafe work practices still occurring, with the full knowledge of management, at the ports of Auckland. I would have thought with the new H&S regulations that now mean CEOs and board of directors can be held accountable, that this cavalier attitude to health and safety would have ceased.
Tony Gibson responds, referencing that specific paragraph. Here's what he wrote back in January 2017.
Your statement is very concerning to me, and I'm unsure as to what you're referring to. I would remind Neil that under the new H&S regulations, he also has a duty to report any breaches to his manager so that the issues can be addressed.
And here's Tony Gibson, Tuesday this week, responding to the report that seems in part to mirror the concerns raised with him more than 4 years ago.
It made me feel sick. And again, I felt a moral obligation to find out why this is happening and make sure that I can lead a program of work that delivers on the recommendations.
While speaking out for the first time, Neil's wife, Jo Bower, says she's angry about Tony Gibson's comments.
Utter bullshit. Utter. Just made me so angry. I wanted to throw things at the television. It was, he knows exactly what's going on down there. He just buries his head.
Why did it make you so angry, exactly?
Well, I've spent the last 7 years living with the results of an accident down there, which is ongoing. It will never... Well, it probably won't get better. Very thankful that my husband is still here with us. He shouldn't be. But it was something an accident the ports were convicted on. And they certainly haven't made things easy for him. And Tony Gibson himself, his communication is appalling. I have emailed him. He has come back with stating he's tried to contacted my husband, and Neil's never had anything from him. He's gone through his phone logs. Neil works 3 days a week, 5 hours a day down the port. If Tony Gibson really wanted to get hold of him to discuss the issues, he knows where he is. He's just... When Neil had his accident, Tony Gibson sat in our house and stated that he wanted Neil to be his eyes and ears on the port, because who better to talk the talk than someone who's walked the walk? And that never happened.
Are you talking, Joe, about eyes and ears when it came to health and safety?
Yeah, health and safety, looking around the port, looking at people, looking at their work practices, what they do.
So what does your husband do now at the port?
As I said, he works 3 days a week, 5 hours a day. He can't work back-to-back days because of his injuries. He's an excellent broom handle painter. He sorts rags into bags. He sweeps floors. He sometimes has to put lollies into bags. Sometimes, if he's really lucky, he gets to load or unload trucks with the hoist. And this is somebody who has worked on the waterfront for 25 plus years. To me, a company that has such issues with health and safety, you have got the best proponent within your workforce for pushing the health and safety issue, but they don't want a bar of him.
So he was a stevedore, and do his injuries mean that this is the work that he's deemed capable of at the port?
Yes, he can't climb ladders. He basically, from his accident, the only parts that weren't injured was his right arm and his head. Every other part of his body had injuries of some sort. He can't climb ladders. He hasn't got, his balance is not good, so he can't go on a ship. But he would have dearly loved to have been able to do the health and safety thing and tell new people and even existing people that it's not worth, shortcuts are not worth it. Do things properly, because you have an accident and your life's
Why stick around? Why does he stick around, Joe? If this job, you've described the job, you've described, concerns about how the port treats its people. Why does he stick around?
Okay, Lisa, you tell me anyone who will employ, he's 62 now, but at the time of the accident, I think he was 55, 56, who would employ someone of that age who he's worked up to 5 hours a day. Initially, when he went back to work, he was doing 3 hours a day. He can't, as I said before, he can't work back-to-back days. The pain that he, unfortunately, his body doesn't allow it. So no one is really going to want to employ somebody like that.
Joe, why have you decided to speak up?
Because I'm sick of seeing Tony Gibson and the Ports of Auckland team spout bullshit. It's just, at times the Ports of Auckland have been very good to us in the initial days, but we've had to fight for things. And Neil's at the stage, got to the stage a long time ago. He's fed up, but he knows he's not going to get work elsewhere. And he feels like he beats his head against a brick wall, but unfortunately for him, I just don't want to let things go. I see the injustice of it, and it just pisses me off.
And is that why and Joe, is that why I'm talking to you today? Because you cannot let this go for your husband's sake?
No, and I'd hate for some other family. I look at those 3 other families who have lost their loved ones, and I'm very lucky that, my daughter and I, we're very lucky we've still got him here. But he's Mr. Sweetness and Light to the front, the people outside, but you get home, the door gets shut, and the pain and the fatigue and the frustration of a brain that knows, he's 62, he should be able to do this, but a body that's saying, no f***ing way, I can't do that.
Are you worried about repercussions? Because I know that Neil raised concerns at the time of the accident about speaking up. Is there still a culture of silence and fear around speaking up at the port?
Yep, I reckon there is. And we're at the stage where, it's just ridiculous. And if they want to bite back at me speaking up, I have every right to say what I'm saying when I see him going through what he's going through, and I see the bullshit coming out of their mouths.
When you heard the findings of that report, which was that there are, systemic failings when it comes to health and safety there is a fair culture among some workers, and clearly a concern about where profits rate against safety. What did you think? Did you recognise those issues?
Oh, totally. And it's productivity, profitability comes over safety. That just goes, why else would you have a productivity bonus?
So what would you say to Tony Gibson right now if he was in front of you?
It wouldn't be pleasant. He just needs to own up. He needs to own it. He needs to stop making excuses, and they just need someone in there to actually run that place properly.
Is he fit for the job?
No, I don't think he is.
Jo Bauer, wife of injured Auckland port worker Neil Bauer. Now, we've approached the ports of Auckland for comment, but we have not received a response as yet. It is almost 21 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Still to come on the programme, Sir Ron Brierley's new title and what should happen to the old one. The lawyer for Chinese workers says they cannot be deported until a full investigation is carried out. 10 men were detained last week by immigration officials who say they were working illegally at construction sites in Auckland. They're being held in custody where their lawyer went to see them today. Chen Liu reports.
9 men remain in Mount Eden prison and another is believed to be held in police custody. 2 are due to leave New Zealand tonight at 11 o'clock and some others in the next week and a half. Speaking outside Mount Eden prison, their lawyer, Matt Robson, says they have been the victims of human trafficking after paying between $10,000 and $30,000 to a third party who arranged travel and work. He says the men had no contract. Some were paid $8 to $10 per hour, and exploitation is obvious.
If I was any of the employers involved, I'd be laughing now that Immigration New Zealand is doing my job to get rid of the witnesses, no bodies, very handy.
Mr. Robson says some of the men were granted a visitor visa in just 2 days, and he questions why visas were seemingly granted at lightning speed. He says third parties in China and New Zealand were involved, and there needs to be an investigation.
The government policy, migrant exploitation policy, is very clear. We're going after the perpetrators of trafficking and exploitation, not the victims. The Cabinet Manual says that if you're a minister, you have to carry out government policy, you have to act in the public interest, and you can't run away from the law and policy. Our Minister of Immigration at the moment is missing in action.
Matt Robertson says they were allowed 1 hour inside the prison with an interpreter from the Unite Union. He says it was far too little time to get adequate information. He's calling for the men's release and says they should be given visas to stay for an investigation to take place. Green MP Ricardo Menendez-March, who also visited the prison, is concerned about the men's welfare after meeting them and says the two men due to leave tonight didn't even know that.
The clear indication by the majority is that not only are they feeling incredibly stressed, that inside corrections they haven't had access to interpretation, which is concerning and regarding to their well-being.
Mr. Menendez-March says given the men have signalled they have been exploited, a thorough investigation is needed. He says deporting them is against Immigration New Zealand's rule to encourage people facing exploitation to speak up, and a signal needs to be sent.
People coming forward does not result in them being detained in this matter, that their well-being is paramount, and that employers, who actually are the ones responsible for the sort of illegality of the nature of the work, are the ones being held to account, not so much the workers being put in detention.
An advocate from Unite Union, Mike Train, says he's very disappointed by claims the men weren't given proper representation. He says his union is willing to take the men into its care if they can be released.
If they are released, that we can find accommodation for them, we can find work for them if they're allowed to work, and we can assist the government and the agencies to expose the network that have allowed this human trafficking to occur.
Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy says he's been assured the appropriate processes have been followed and Immigration New Zealand has not found any evidence of trafficking. He says agencies are satisfied further investigations around employment and immigration breaches can be carried out without the men remaining in New Zealand. Immigration says the men have been advised of their rights to legal representation, while corrections say the men have been given access to courts and interpreters. Mōtahoraka o te ahiahi nei ko Chanleo tēnei.
The Prime Minister has started the process of stripping disgraced New Zealand businessman Sir Ron Brierley of his knighthood. Brierley was in court in Sydney today where he pleaded guilty to 3 charges of possessing child sex abuse material. Stop Demand founder and barrister Denise Ritchie joins me now. Denise, why should he lose his honour?
Well, the criteria has to have been met in this case, surely. I mean, public opinion would consider it wrong for him to hold a royal honour in the circumstances where he has had a sustained pattern of behaviour involving the trade in material of children, which required children to be either raped, violated or sexually denigrated. And if that doesn't bring the honours system into disrepute, well, what does?
You're talking about the production of the images that he had.
The possession of the images that he had.
Yeah. So there is a process. The Prime Minister has started that process. But do you think he should just voluntarily give up his knighthood?
Well, that's one option. I mean, we put out our media release today on the basis that there was always the alternative for the Prime Minister's office to not take any steps until later in the month when he's sentenced. So we wanted to preempt that. Given his guilty plea, we thought the process should be relatively straightforward and that there was no reason for the process not to begin immediately. So well done to the PM. It was a decisive step forward, and I think it's one she couldn't be seen as vacillating over.
So what can you tell us about the offending?
Don't know much more than what's been out there in the public domain. It seems like he initially faced 6 charges back in December 2019, and then last year in November a further 8 charges were added. Now, all up, we understand this amounted to a collection of over 200,000 images and over 500 videos, and I believe there was also a Word document. Now, I believe that the charges that have been withdrawn, it's really just sort of trading off so that the process is simpler over there, but he's pleaded guilty to having at least 1,615. But you've got to keep in mind, I mean, every one of these images, there's a victim, and these are horrific crimes.
And what would you say about the position of power or authority that he holds and the fact that he's now been found guilty of these crimes?
Well, it's certainly a massive fall from grace. I mean, it says something about people, I think, in positions who just believe they're invincible or untouchable. There's got to be an element of brazenness to have gone through the Sydney customs just armed with so much material and thinking there was no way that he would ever be stopped, as if there was untouchability and issues of hubris, etc. So, yes, it's a terrible way to end a lifelong record of being held in fairly high regard by many, well, at least to the extent of getting a knighthood.
Denise, is there could he actually be deported to New Zealand? Is there a possibility he could become a so-called 501?
Gosh, I hadn't even thought about that. But one thing I will say is that Stop Demand is pleased that these charges were on Australian soil. Our concern was the New Zealand courts can be so weak when it comes to name suppression that I think some of the courts judges would have been falling over themselves to grant him name suppression from the get-go. I mean, a lot of prominent people, as we know, are getting name suppression for all manner of things. So it was great in Australia that they named him right from the outset. So from that perspective, I think, well, good on Australia. If they elect to biff him back here, I don't know. But
Denise, in terms of the knighthood, do you think, obviously there's a process, it's underway now, but do you think there should be automatic removal of a title like that if you're found guilty of sex offences?
Well, there is a process, and the criteria is not limited to, but the grounds include situations, I'm quoting now, where the holder of an honour is sentenced to more than 3 months in prison, and the offence involved disgraceful conduct such that public opinion would consider it wrong for the offender to hold a royal honour, in brackets, bringing the honours system into disrepute. So there are several issues there, because if you look at the history, the only person that I was able to find, just in a very scant research, was Dr. Morgan Fahey. Of course, he was stripped not of a knighthood, but as an officer of the Order of the British Empire. There was an attempt to strip Sir Douglas Graham, if you recall, some years ago, over financial mismanagement, but that didn't really get off the ground. And I guess the other precedent would be Australia arranging to strip Rolf Harris of his knighthood, and that went through. So pretty similar type of offending where you've got sexual crimes being committed against children. And in some ways, we because of course Stop Demand is coming and cracking down on demand, this is a particularly heinous crime that often people don't really appreciate, that the full understanding of what happens only gets clearer as these victims become older, and then they realise with horror that their crime will never ever stop. Until the day they die, there will be men, and it is men unfortunately, men like Brierley, who will be reliving getting sexual pleasure out of their violation, and so they feel like they've been re-violated all the time, and it's a horrific psychological burden for them to have to deal with. So in that case, you couldn't think of many other crimes that would be that heinous.
Really appreciate your time this evening. That is Stop Demand founder and barrister Denise Ritchie, who there is calling for Ron Brierley to lose his knighthood now that he's been found guilty of possessing child sex abuse material. You've heard of bonus bonds, but would you try your luck with All Blacks bonds? The idea is being pitched by the New Zealand Rugby Players Association as an alternative to the proposed partial sale of New Zealand Rugby's commercial arm to American firm Silver Lake. Our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe went to test the field.
All Blacks fans are used to seeing victories here at Eden Park, but could those same fans soon be propping the All Blacks up? The New Zealand Rugby Players Association wants to see a deal with American interests kicked for touch. Instead, one of its suggestions is All Blacks bonds. You or I would put up cash and go on the draw to win prizes like cheap tickets. So we wanted to know, would Kiwis support a scheme like this?
If it means keeping them in New Zealand, I think plenty of New Zealanders will get behind it. Yeah, I'll look at that rather than selling off half of the team to someone else. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'm a sports fan. I see a lot of that. I'm a big soccer fan at the moment. See a lot of the selling of teams across international boundaries. So I think to have something that gives the public and the real fans a chance to invest is quite positive.
I'd prefer the All Black brand stays in New Zealand and New Zealand owned, I think.
No, you can't sell any of it off. It makes us part American then, wouldn't it?
It's our team. New Zealand team, I thought, not a US team.
To keep our best players, yeah, I do think it's a good idea, but they have to be careful that they don't sell out, per se.
No, I wouldn't.
Wouldn't give them some of your own money?
No, that's my money.
But would All Blacks bonds really work? The Players Association says the bonds would be $20 or $50 each, and the holders, that's you and me, the fans, would enter a regular draw for cash prizes and money can't buy experiences. But New Zealand Rugby's preferred deal with Silver Lake is said to be worth $460 million. And Simplicity Managing Director Sam Stubbs doubts a bond scheme would be that lucrative.
So the issue I think with this is it's very well intentioned and it's a nice idea, but if you think about rugby across the country is run very, very professionally, so it probably needs to be funded professionally. This feels like a grassroots way of funding what is a very efficient, very professional, but also very money-hungry business. Stubbs says the chance of All Blacks bonds generating sustainable revenue is low. Bonus bonds started out being wildly popular when they were launched because they were paying a very fair return. So what Kiwis were getting was a capital guarantee and a good return. But of course, bonus bonds now has wound up. And that really tells you a lot about Kiwis' appetite for something which gives you a lower return but does some good. They don't actually want to do that. What they want to do is put their money into things like, term deposit, normal bonds, the share market, KiwiSaver, whatever, and get a good return and then decide what they will do with that by way of charitable giving. New Zealand Rugby and the Players Association have been locked in mediation to come to a resolution over the Silver Lake deal. In short, some key players have said they don't want it. NZR, on the other hand, says it needs to happen to save the game. Ex-All Blacks have had their say too. Former winger Sir Brian Williams spoke on the deal at a provincial championship announcement this afternoon.
A deal like what Silver Lake are offering is very tempting. But I guess by the same token, you're selling off 15% of your commercial rights, your income opportunity going forward. So I guess that needs to be looked at pretty closely, but my gut feeling is that it will go ahead.
Sir Brian says the Silver Fern is sacrosanct, built on the blood and sweat of players, which is why there's so much feeling around the deal.
I guess once you start commercialising that, people get a bit tetchy.
New Zealand Rugby Chief Executive Mark Robinson says the organisation has shared its views on All Blacks bonds with the Players Association, but he was defensive when asked about what had been discussed.
We've shared our views with Rob, around that. That letter was obviously something that came to us 2 months ago, as I said earlier in the week. So a lot of time has passed on when we, caught up with the players earlier on in the week and recently. They've certainly moved on. So I'm not going to go into the detail of that. That was a time and a place around that letter that's different to now.
He says mediation with the Players Association is ongoing and refused to say when it will conclude.
160,000 players in this country, and we have a country of 5 million people that care incredibly deeply about the game. So we understand we have a duty of care to everyone that's associated with the game at the moment, and we're taking that responsibility really seriously. So, we'll keep talking with all our stakeholders. There's ongoing conversations with our provincial unions, as there are with the players, and they're all really constructive, and they're all, fair and reasonable and the right thing to be doing.
So it seems the country's rugby rulers have a ways to go before getting their top talent on board with any partial sale of the country's most loved team. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
Coming Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the housing crisis hits people living with disabilities hard. New rules for emergency spots in MIQ, and the Aussies suing their government because they can't get home. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Do get in touch. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. If you're heading away for a long weekend, get in touch. Let us know what the traffic is like out there. If it is safe to text us, if you're a passenger maybe. Let's get to the headlines now with Susanna.
Wellington College has started removing all signage with the name of old boy Sir Ron Brierley after he pleaded guilty to possessing child sex abuse material. The high-profile businessman, who's 83, admitted 3 charges today in a Sydney court, while a further 14 charges were withdrawn. The Prime Minister has started also moves to strip Sir Ron of his knighthood. A spokesperson for Jacinda Ardern says she has asked for the forfeiture process to be initiated. And an immigration advisor says the large number of unused managed isolation rooms has been like a knife through the heart for separated families. The Prime Minister today signalled a continued fall in demand from returning New Zealanders, which may mean they can consider reunification of split families. Katie Armstrong, who has led a campaign to open the border to children and partners, says for migrants, empty rooms has been like watching unused life rafts drift by while their boat sinks. The wife of an injured Ports of Auckland worker is furious about management's claims they were unaware of the extent of health and safety failings revealed in a highly critical report on Tuesday. In 2015, the port was fined $55,000 and ordered to pay $25,000 in compensation after failing to ensure the safety of Neil Bauer, who was badly hurt on the job. Jo Bauer says she is very angry at the Chief Executive Tony Gibson's comments. The government is to extend temporary immigration powers to respond to COVID-19 until May 2023. The powers were due to expire next month. However, the Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy has introduced a bill today to keep them in place. The All Blacks captain Sam Cane will be sidelined for up to 6 months following surgery after suffering a chest muscle injury. Cane will have surgery next week. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tako ingoa. It is time for the business news now with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, Fonterra has, sold 2 of its China farms?
Yeah, announced or confirmed about an hour ago that it's completed the divestment of 2 farming hubs that it had in China for about $500 million to a local buyer. The ownership of these farms have not necessarily been smooth sailing for the company. They had to write down the value of them in 2019 and again in 2020. To quote the CEO's previous comments, or to paraphrase them really, he says that they haven't been as operationally effective as they would have liked. But CEO Miles Hurrell says today in a statement that the establishment of these farms were important for the development of the Chinese dairy industry. So the proceeds of the sale, they will go towards paying down Fonterra's debt. And it's worth mentioning that the sale is really just a part of the cooperative sort of strategy over the past 2 years when it sort of underwent this reset or restructure 2 years ago after having back-to-back losses. And the focus has really been about focusing on the New Zealand milk supply to produce higher quality and, more importantly, higher yielding products, consumer products for overseas markets. So rather than being this company that sort of has fingers in a range of pies around the world, the sale doesn't necessarily lessen Fonterra's focus on the Chinese market. It continues to be its biggest sales channel, and its half-year results sales there were actually up 38%. They were really key for it delivering a pretty solid half-year result in light of just sort of widespread uncertainty brought on by the pandemic.
Okay, and what's this other company that you're wanting to talk about who's gone from penny stocks to dollar stocks?
Yeah, so it's not a firm that we have often talked about here on Checkpoint. It's a relatively small fry. This is the technology company Raycon. Now, it manufactures computer chips used in telecommunications equipment, and it debuted on the NZX back in 2006. There was a flurry of excitement at the time. It debuted at about $2.50 and then peaked in 2007 at $5.60 a share. But since then, things haven't really been quite smooth for the company. It reported multiple losses. There were poor investments. It's important to stress that this company was operating at a time that the whole telecommunications industry in the early 2000s was in flux. It was an evolving market. People didn't know where consumer demand was going to be. And for Raycon, things didn't really pan out as they would have liked. It was forced to scale down its operations. There was even a shareholder revolt because the company was started by 3 family members, a father and his 2 sons. Shareholders forced the father to step aside from the company, and the 2 brothers, they were actually forced to take a pay cut of about 28%. So all of this sort of culminated in seeing the company's shares tank. For the best part of a decade, they've been sort of less than 50 cents per share, but things are finally looking up for this company. Demand for its products are increasing, especially as big telcos look to really scale up their investment in 5G products. And also, a fire at a circuits manufacturer in the past month, that sort of added to more woes of this global shortage of semiconductor computer chips, and that's actually benefited the firm because it's seen an increase in demand for its products. So shares in the company, they eclipsed $1 today for the first time since 2011. They're up 7% or 7 cents to $1.01 per share.
A whole $1.01. What other numbers do you have for us?
So the
Nicholas?
NZX is down 0.5% or 72.4 points, down to 12,561. The dollar 69.7 US cents and 92 Australian.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with our business update there. And an update on a story that we had last night about the cows at Cornwall Park. The park in Auckland received angry backlash to a decision to export live cattle to Mongolia. Well, late this afternoon, the Cornwall Park Trust Board put out a statement to say it had reviewed its decision and, on reflection, would no longer be part of an overseas-based breeding program. Park Director Michael Ayrton says they've recognised many people are concerned about various aspects of the live cattle trade from New Zealand, and in light of those concerns, have decided cows from Cornwall Park will no longer be part of any overseas-based breeding programs. He says they've been reminded of how many people see Cornwall Park as theirs and feel that they have a stake in how it is run. Terminally ill patients and New Zealanders travelling to see dying relatives will now find it easier to secure an emergency spot in managed isolation. And spare capacity in managed isolation has prompted the Prime Minister to signal split families may also be able to reunite here. Our immigration reporter Jill Bonnet has more.
Trying to get a room in MIQ has been a heartbreaking experience for many New Zealanders trying to get home, spending hours endlessly refreshing the website to try to secure a spot. This week, days began to pop up for April and later. But Joint Head of Managed Isolation and Quarantine, Megan Main, says the situation changes quickly.
It has been quickly snaffled up for April, so we've now got very little availability for April, and we've still got a little bit of availability for June and some in July. And, you know, we will continue to make vouchers available as quickly as we can if they're freed up.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says the spare capacity in border hotels in April and beyond opens up new possibilities.
If we continue to see extra capacity available, you know, that helps us in our thinking around who is it that otherwise might have a legal basis to be in New Zealand but haven't been able to travel. So family members who have not been able to be reunified, when we see a bit of easing there, that tells us that we might have the space to have both citizens and some of those individuals coming back through.
Work visa holder Henko de Beer's wife and 2 children are still in South Africa, the border closing 20 hours before they were due to join him last March. He last saw his son Sion when he was 4 days old, after leaving them to start his job as a production team leader in Hamilton.
We are extremely excited to hear that at least we are moving into that direction, however long that may take. It does make you feel, hey, we can still get through this. Looks like it might still even become a reality.
Just over 1,000 people are believed to be separated from their families because of the border closure. There are competing interests in the queue for managed isolation. Universities want overseas students and businesses want workers. The Central Otago Mayor Tim Cadogan says the spaces shouldn't go to waste and they could be used for seasonal workers.
We've got a desperate shortage here in Central Otago for the apple and grape harvest and also pruning after that. And one of the bottlenecks we've got is to get more people into the MIQ.
But an immigration advisor, Katie Armstrong, says it's time to prioritise.
At this point in time, we should be picking babies over fruit.
She says for parents separated from their children, thousands of empty managed isolation rooms since July last year have been hard to take. Ms Armstrong says for migrants, it's like watching empty life rafts drift past as their boat sinks. And she wants Cabinet to make decisions next week.
On Tuesday, they should be announcing that X number of split migrant families can start coming back immediately. Not at some point in the future, but immediately. Those beds are going empty every single night. New Zealanders are paying for those beds. Those families that come in will pay for their quarantine.
Other managed isolation changes were announced today. There'll be 100 more emergency spaces within MIQ, giving a total of 350. About 240 people a week apply to skip the queue for a room in a border hotel, and just over half are declined. New grounds to apply will include people who are terminally ill and wanting to return home to see loved ones, and those visiting close relatives with an end-stage disease here or overseas. Other changes clarify emergency allocations for urgent critical workers. For Checkpoint, Jill Bonnet.
It's 12 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. After 6 tonight, Christchurch is benched for the Women's World Cup. It's one of the most recognisable features on Wellington's waterfront, but for how much longer? The privately owned Sea Lion is a World War II era ship adorned with hundreds of painted penguins. It's spent the last 18 years stationed at Queen's Wharf, but it's now being told to sail along. As reporter Harry Locke and video journalist Samuel Rillstone report, those who live on board aren't going down without a fight.
This is the lounge/mess area. This is our seating is around here as mattresses because we rearrange the space a lot. We have different zones and we have different types of events going on, so hence the design layout in here is for versatility.
The Sea Lion has had many lives since it was built in Adelaide in 1945. It was meant to be a World War II supply ship, but the war ended before it was finished. It went on to be a minesweeper, squid fishing ship and a houseboat. Now quirkily painted with hundreds of penguins and a few sea lions, the vessel, sporting a shabby chic look, has become a rental property and a self-described community and arts space.
And we've had a number of kind of one-off gigs out here where we've just had a band set up here and audience on the wharf and 50, 80, 100 people coming down and engaging with their music, which is, it's great. It's a beautiful open air kind of DIY gig opportunity that we've been thoroughly enjoying.
Dylan Pyle and Simon van der Zayden are two of the boat's occupants, organising film nights, games nights and live music. But all of that is now under threat. After 18 years moored at Queen's Wharf, it's been told to give up its spot. The boat is taking on water. While 4 pumps are being used to ensure it doesn't sink, the boat is classified as non-seaworthy. That's why the City Council, who are taking over the mooring contracts on the wharf, has decided not to offer one to the Sea Lion. As a result, Centreport are planning on tugging the boat to Glasgow Wharf by next week. Dylan and Simon have started a petition, which so far has over 850 signatures.
What we're looking for with the petition is that an engagement of discussion is brought upon us where we can lock in a feasible timeline that allows everyone to have a sense of satisfaction and safety. Instead, the decisions just can't be sprung upon us without any consultation.
In a statement, Centreport said they are working with the owner to get the boat repaired. When asked why that was occurring now, they responded there have been ongoing issues with the vessel, which has been degrading over time. The change of ownership and the impending handover of administration of the Queen's Wharf berths highlighted the need for the vessel's seaworthiness to be brought up to standard. But owner Selwyn Finley, who lives in Nelson, says he was happy enjoying the boat's current use.
It struck a chord with me when the old owner said there's people on board, and I thought, well, that's kind of good, and it's been used for a creative space. I've been to concerts on board, and it's like a nice little intimate club down below, and it just suits it.
His long-term plan was to do it up and then take it across the Cook Strait to enjoy in the Marlborough Sounds.
When they first sent the letter to me, I sort of, stunned a bit for a couple of days. It's a shame. There's always going to be something come along, but just sort of disrupted things and put pressure. Of course, financially it's going to be hard. But yeah, it's just involved the whole reef thing.
Council spokesperson Richard McLean says the boat isn't fit to stay put.
I'm no nautical expert, but I mean, the thing is, Queen's Wharf is not there to be a permanent home for a vessel that clearly can't get around the harbour.
He's unsure of the inhabitants' description of the boat as an arts and community space.
We're puzzled by that. We're taken aback, and we tend to think that people are overstating the importance of the sea line and Wellington's kind of community sector, really.
But the boat did feature an evening DJ every night as part of the council-funded events programme What If the City Was a Theatre? And they also had plans to take part in June's Jazz Festival. But with the boat now moving on, those plans are sinking fast. From Te Whanganui Atara, for Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
And if you were listening to that story, we'll put the video from Harry and Samuel up on our Facebook page so you can check out the pictures inside the ship and also the mural on it outside. A group of Australians unable to return home because of the cap on arrivals have filed legal action against the federal government. The complaint's been lodged with the UN Human Rights Committee in Geneva over claims that Australians are being banned from entering their own country. The ABC's Alexia Atwood reports.
After months of being bumped off flights, extending leases month by month, getting stuck in multiple countries, Australian citizen Peter Den Hayton knows the pain of stranded Aussies.
It was 9 months that I was separated from my partner, which was definitely not the intention. It's the pressure, once you get bumped off your first flight, or your first flight gets cancelled, and then the second one you get bumped off. It's super stressful.
He believes more should be done to get Australians home, and with his background in IT, set up Facebook pages where Australians could help advocate to get themselves home.
I think it's not right to keep citizens, especially citizens, out of their own country.
Almost 500,000 Australians have returned home since the beginning of the pandemic, but there are still more than 36,000 stranded overseas. And whenever there's a local outbreak, it's made all the harder. As a result of the twin outbreak at the Princess Alexandria Hospital, the Queensland Premier, Anastasia Palaszczuk, has written to the Prime Minister, wanting to slow the number of people returning from overseas to quarantine in her state.
The numbers from overseas in our hospitals is now 68. So that's return travellers coming back. And like I said, that is a real risk for us.
Human rights lawyer Jeffrey Robertson takes issue with the low numbers of return travellers Australia is letting in.
It's apparently accepting, it doesn't have to, these quotas that are insisted upon by states, and that's the bottleneck. I mean, there are hotels, plenty of hotels empty.
Jeffrey Robertson is advising a group of Australians who have lodged legal action with the UN Human Rights Committee in Geneva over claims that Australians are being arbitrarily banned from entering their own country.
One's a microbiologist, one's a chemist, and the other's a volcanologist. And they've all been vaccinated.
Jane McAdam is a professor of law and the director of the Calder Centre for International Refugee Law at the University of New South Wales.
Under international human rights law, there is no absolute right to enter one's country, but at the same time, the government can't arbitrarily deprive you of that right. So what that means is that people's entry may be subject to brief temporary restrictions, provided that they're reasonable, they're necessary, and they're based on clear legal criteria.
And so would the government argue that there are necessary reasons because they've got a stretched hotel quarantine system and they're dealing with an international pandemic?
Well, presumably so. But of course, the situation changes over time. So, as more and more people are vaccinated, the situation may change. It's not fixed back a year ago as to what the situation was then. This is a decision that has to be revisited over and over.
Jane McAdam says even if the Human Rights Committee ruled in favour of stranded Australians, and that could take years before a decision is made, they can't force the hand of the Australian government to bring Aussies home.
The views they issue are highly authoritative, and it's a bad look, of course, if a government decides not to follow their views. But as I say, the committee cannot force the hand of the Australian government.
The World Today contacted the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade for a response.
Alexia Atwood reporting there. And a bit of a traffic update here. We've got a text from someone who's obviously down near Wellington saying traffic through Kapiti Coast north of Wellington, much lighter than normal, sailing through, they reckon. However, Waka Kotahi says there's heavy traffic on Auckland's motorways tonight, and it's asking people to consider delaying their journey or be prepared for long delays. It's the Easter break this weekend, meaning many people will be relaxing with their whānau, eating a lot of chocolate and hot cross buns. But for some, they'll be stuck inside managed isolation. Around 4,700 people will be in New Zealand MIQ facilities over the weekend. And as our reporter Alice Stewart found out, the Easter Bunny is welcome, provided it follows some strict rules.
Much like the Christmas holidays, managed isolation facilities around New Zealand are putting on a show for returnees over the Easter break.
As long as the Easter Bunny follows all infection prevention control protocols, then the Easter Bunny can come in.
Megan Main is the Deputy Chief Executive for Managed Isolation and Quarantine. She says they are happy to try and accommodate everyone's needs and make people's time in isolation as comfortable as possible.
We know that for some people Easter is an important religious celebration, and we'll be giving returnees information on how they can also access online church services. Our facilities have amazing, enthusiastic hotel management teams, and they help our returnees observe and celebrate all sorts of occasions. Easter, they helped with Chinese New Year, St Patrick's Day, even Valentine's Day.
She says each MIQ facility is doing something different.
Some will be serving hot cross buns, others will be distributing some chocolates, and I know some have got some decorations up as well. I've seen amazing bunnies for Easter made out of face cloths. I've seen bunnies made of paper plates wearing safe face masks to protect them from COVID, of course. So it's a chance for them to be creative and have a bit of fun, while at the heart of everything they do is keeping our returnees safe and protecting them from COVID.
The Grand Millennium and the Pullman in Auckland have made up Easter gift boxes, while the Jet Park Hotel in Hamilton has made little folded bunnies out of face cloths for their guests. Megan Main says that other religious seasons are celebrated as well.
Managed isolation facilities are also very diverse places with many cultures and nations represented. So we facilitate and support a range of cultures and religions. For example, Ramadan is coming up soon. We understand that observing Ramadan in managed isolation will be a very different experience to how people would usually observe this holy month. So we'll be doing what we can to support them and make them as comfortable as possible. For example, for those who choose to observe fasting, we'll provide their meals at specific times. We'll adjust portion sizes for them and we'll try to accommodate some of the meals they'd traditionally eat.
Both Good Friday and Easter Monday are national public holidays in New Zealand. For Checkpoint, Alice Stewart.
Now, before the 6 o'clock news, some of your feedback on the All Blacks and this proposal for New Zealand Rugby to sell 50% to an American company. This listener says, don't do it. Within a few years and following future financial stress, New Zealand won't own the All Blacks at all. And Gary's got in touch to say, unfortunately, everything is commercialised. It would be good if we can have some things that are not commercialised, says Gary. Another says, selling the ABs is fundamentally fractionating.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with tēnei. The Prime Minister has started moves to strip disgraced New Zealand-born businessman Sir Ron Brierley of his knighthood. He pleaded guilty to 3 charges of possessing child sex abuse material today in a Sydney court. A spokesperson for Jacinda Ardern says she has asked for the forfeiture process to be initiated. Meanwhile, the Wellington High School, once attended by Sir Ron, has started removing all signage with his name, including a theatre. In a statement, Wellington College's board chair Paul Retimanu says following confirmation of his plea, the school began removing the signage today. Sir Ron has been a generous benefactor to his former school. The lawyer for a group of Chinese workers says the men should be released to assist with any investigation rather than being deported. 9 of the 10 men are held at Mount Eden Prison and 2 are due to depart New Zealand tonight. Chen Liu reports.
The men are facing deportation after immigration officers found them working in New Zealand illegally. Their lawyer, Matt Robson, claims the men have been the victims of human trafficking and need to stay for investigation purposes. Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy says he's been assured the appropriate processes have been followed. He says agencies are satisfied further investigations around employment and immigration breaches can be carried out without the men remaining in New Zealand. Ko Chenliu Aho.
Managed isolation and quarantine says hundreds of vouchers it released for the coming weeks have been quickly snaffled up. For the first time in months, people flying into the country have had a number of dates to choose from throughout April, June and July. They've previously had to book as far as 3 months ahead, with some spending hours sifting through the booking website for any cancellations. Authorities haven't been able to say exactly why the spaces became available. Deputy Chief Executive of MIQ, Megan Main, says the situation changes quickly.
It has been quickly snaffled up for April, so we've now got very little availability for April, and we've still got a little bit of availability for June and some in July. And, you know, we will continue to make vouchers available as quickly as we can if they're freed up.
MIQ Deputy Chief Executive Megan Main. The government is to extend temporary immigration powers to respond to COVID-19 until May 2023. The powers were due to expire next month. However, the Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy has introduced a bill today to keep them in place. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever.
Chris Farfoy says the powers have allowed for quick decisions to be made to make changes to visa conditions, extend expiry dates and bring in migrant workers where industries are facing labour shortages. He says COVID-19 is still widespread overseas and the extension until 2023 ensures the immigration system can continue to be responsive and flexible. Mr Farfoy says the powers can only be used for COVID-19 related matters and must not disadvantage visa holders. From Parliament, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
One of Taranaki's big industrial players, Methanex, has confirmed 75 jobs will be lost after its decision to close one of its plants. The methanol producer decided to mothball its Waitara Valley plant in February, citing an inability to secure gas supply as the reason for shutting down the plant. At the time, it said it would retain some activities at the site, such as truck loading to supply the local market. Methanex says it makes up to 10% of the Taranaki economy. Carterton residents are again being told they need to boil their water after another E. coli reading in the Wairarapa Town supply. This means boiling all water used for drinking, making baby formula, juice and ice, washing fruit and vegetables, other food preparation and cooking needs, or brushing teeth. The previous boil water notice was only lifted on Sunday. Carterton's Mayor Greg Lang says it's extremely disappointing news.
Today we had an E. coli reading that was right on the limit we're required to report. So we're taking a precautionary approach and issued a boil water notice. We've had a whole week of clear readings, and this one's just coming out of the blue.
Residents can get water from outside the Carterton Event Centre. The famous pink cherry blossoms of Kyoto reached full bloom this year on March 26th, the earliest date in the 12th century since records began. Yasuyuki Aono, a professor of environmental science, says the earlier flowering is a clear indicator of climate change. Global temperatures in 2020 were among the highest on record. Cherry blossoms have long historical and cultural roots in Japan, heralding spring and inspiring artists and poets through the centuries. In modern times, people gather under the cherry blossoms every spring for blossom viewing parties. It's 5 minutes past 6. The weather has foiled the White Ferns bid for a rare series win over Australia. The T20 decider at Eden Park got underway late due to the weather and was reduced to 13 overs per side. Batting first, Australia got through to 14 for 1 in the third over before the rain returned and the match was ultimately abandoned. The Black Caps' third and final T20 game against Bangladesh is due to start at 7 o'clock, but the weather may scupper that match too. The All Blacks captain Sam Cane will have surgery on a chest muscle injury next week, sidelining him for up to 6 months. He suffered the injury in the Chiefs' win over the Blues last weekend and will miss the remainder of the Super Rugby season. Talks between top players and NZ Rugby will restart next week to try to bridge the gap over the sale of rights to a US equity firm. Silver Lake is negotiating for a 15% stake in NZ Rugby, rugby rights, for $460 million. But the New Zealand Players Association has balked and sent a letter in January about its concerns about the sale, including maintaining the country's rugby culture. New Zealand rugby boss Mark Robinson is optimistic it will go through, saying negotiations would continue again next week. He says some of the issues raised by players have been worked through. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Alison Ballance looks back on her illustrious career as host of Our Changing World. This week's overseas correspondent Tabu Batagira is on the line from Uganda, and Chris Bumby is at the intersection of science, fact and fiction, dealing with energy and all those sci-fi gizmos that need the power of a small reactor in your back pocket. Plausible, or would we have to change the laws of physics? On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Showers spreading south today, some possibly heavy and thundery, then becoming partly cloudy early tomorrow. Waitomo to Manawatu, including central high country, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mostly cloudy with a few showers. Some possibly heavy and thundery, clearing to fine tomorrow morning. However, rain developing tomorrow night. Horowhenua to Wellington and Wairarapa, cloudy periods, rain developing tomorrow afternoon. Nelson and Marlborough, cloudy periods with isolated showers about the ranges, scattered rain tomorrow night. Canterbury, mainly fine tonight, rain developing tomorrow morning, then easing in the evening. Bulla to Fiordland, including Otago and Southland, fine, but cloud and rain developing in Fiordland tonight, spreading northwards tomorrow before easing to isolated showers by the evening. And Chatham Islands, rain with thunderstorms possible, easing to a few showers tonight, but rain returning tomorrow night. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Don't forget about us. We need homes too. That's the message from those living with disabilities in Dunedin. The city hosted an accessible housing forum today and several politicians heard harrowing stories from Dunedin's disabled communities. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown was there and has more.
A quarter of New Zealand's population lives with some form of disability, but only 2% of homes have been built with accessibility in mind. In an overheated housing market, it's tough for anyone to find a home. But Access for All representative Chris Ford says it's so much tougher for those with disabilities.
It is a very deep crisis. It's actually overlaid a crisis that pre-existed the housing crisis for the non-disabled population. I think that even for younger people today, younger disabled people, there is also that desire, that the same desire that their peers have to go out and live independently, but yet there are those affordability and accessibility issues as well.
Mr Ford says those living with disabilities also face higher costs of living. It was a combination of such factors that led to his own 11-month-long brush with homelessness.
I was living in transitional housing in a motel, but you're officially classified, I was officially classified as being homeless. And during that time, I was also expected, or for part of it anyway, to look for accommodation myself.
His hunt for a home ended with the assistance of Kāinga Ora last month, but his experience motivated him to organise today's forum. He says his new home is warm, dry, affordable and accessible, but not everyone is so lucky. Peter Mezieski says he had a home that suited him until last year, when an SUV crashed into it. Despite most of the building being deemed unsafe to inhabit, Peter still lives there.
The part that I'm living in is essentially just my bedroom and 1/4 of my living room has been kind of converted. Otherwise, where else am I supposed to live? Under a bridge?
And it's not for a lack of trying. He's lost count of the homes he's viewed in the past year, but estimates it's about 200. Of those, only a few were affordable, and even fewer had appropriate accessibility for his wheelchair. Compounding this is that he and his wife's income means they're ineligible for Ministry of Social Development support.
When I rang MSD about it, they said, well, look, we appreciate that you still got a disability. However, due to the rules and regulations, you're over the threshold. We can't do anything about it. As much as we would love to do something about it, we can't.
But Peter and Chris's stories aren't isolated examples.
We were lucky enough to go into a basement that regularly flooded with stormwater and sewage every time it rained and almost every month.
I want to move because of flooding. I can't move until I turn 65.
The problem I see that we have in Dunedin is the cost. $440 for an apartment, single room. I'm on a benefit. That's more than I get for my benefit per week.
Several Labour and Green MPs, including Associate Housing Minister Poto Williams, were at the forum, as well as Dunedin's Mayor Aaron Hawkins. Ms Williams told the forum Kāinga Ora had started building new social housing in Dunedin and 15% of all new homes will be built with disability access. Chris Ford says he wants to see that number increase, and disability advocates hope to develop an accessible housing action plan for Ōtepoti Dunedin and the wider Otago region. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
In just over 2 years' time, some of the world's best female footballers will take to the field in New Zealand and Australia. Today, FIFA announced 4 New Zealand cities will host matches for the 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup. That means celebration for Auckland, Hamilton, Wellington and Dunedin. But Christchurch misses out. Felicity Reid reports.
It's the biggest gathering of the best female football players in the world. 5 New Zealand cities lobbed in a bid to host games. They were all successful, except Christchurch. Mainland football CEO Julian Bowden is shocked.
We're looking for some more feedback around perhaps why the city wasn't selected, but I guess FIFA will have its reasons and we'll just need to work around that. I mean, there's still an opportunity hopefully to get perhaps some teams based there for their training and make Christchurch a home for them over the tournament.
New Zealand football CEO Andrew Pragnell says they'll be in contact with those involved in the Christchurch bid to offer an explanation. But it was the below-par facilities that ultimately ruled the city out of contention.
The standards for a Tier 1 FIFA event, one of their biggest events, are very high, and they were well aware that the stadium is temporary, so in that regard it's a fairly cut-and-dried case.
The city did host Under-20 Football World Cup games in 2015, and a disappointed Mayor Leanne Dalziel acknowledges it was a step too far this time, with the new stadium build not due for completion until 2024.
We just couldn't meet the higher stadium specification this time. But this is the last time.
The eyes of the football world will be on Eden Park for the tournament's opening game on July 10th, but it's a venue the home side aren't familiar with. The football ferns have never played there, and for New Zealand age group representative and Aucklander Saskia Vorspa, it signals a big moment for football.
You think of Eden Park as like a rugby or a cricket turf, and football doesn't really get played in this kind of big stadium in New Zealand. And so to be even able to walk on the pitch today was exciting, and it's just, exciting what the future holds.
Down the road in Hamilton, Waibot Football Federation boss Karen Walters is waiting on the match schedule announcement later this year. She's got her fingers crossed for a match involving the world champions USA at Waikato Stadium, but says the 2015 tournament showed them what to expect.
It's not always the big guys that bring the passion and the level of spectator support. Being at the stadium and seeing some of those smaller countries celebrating each other back in 2015 was amazing, and the city really got behind it.
The football tournament is the last in a trio of Women's World Cups to be held in New Zealand over the next 2 years. Auckland Mayor Phil Goff says the Football World Cup is an unparalleled event for the city. He's predicting a financial boost of $60 million additional gross domestic product with an influx of international tourists.
For the city financially, it's probably the biggest event ever. We think that the Rugby World Cup was huge. That was 450 million people watching internationally. They're predicting 1.3 billion people will be watching this cup.
Dunedin has also turned into a destination for international sporting events, winning favour with both the organisers of the Women's Cricket World Cup as well as the Football World Cup. Mayor Aaron Hawkins says after a tough 12 months for the events industry, today's announcement is the lift that they need.
It's great to have that pipeline of major events to give our local economy confidence that major events will again be a big part of what we do here in Dunedin.
While the tournament opens in New Zealand, the final will be played at Sydney's Stadium Australia, and each country will host one semi-final each. The other Australian cities hosting games in the tournament that ends in August 2023 are Adelaide, Brisbane, Melbourne and Perth. For Checkpoint, Felicity Reid.
There are calls for celebration in Queensland with the short, sharp lockdown lifted in time for the Easter weekend. The Greater Brisbane region went into a 3-day snap lockdown on Monday after community cases were discovered. Our World Watch reporter Paulina Lau has more.
Easter is back on. Millions of residents in Queensland had been nervously waiting to find out whether a COVID lockdown would be extended over the long weekend. Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk made the announcement.
That is good news for Queensland, and Easter is good to go. The lockdown will be lifted from 12 noon today, and I encourage people to take care on the roads. Please be safe and enjoy your time away with family and friends.
Greater Brisbane entered a 3-day snap lockdown on Monday after 4 community cases were reported, adding to a growing cluster. There are 10 new cases today, but 9 of those are linked to quarantine. Queensland's Chief Medical Officer Jeanette Young is praising residents for high testing rates.
So this is very encouraging news. We only had 1 community-acquired case overnight in Queensland, and that was the perfect case, if I could describe it as that. The amount of testing over the last 48 hours has been astronomical. Thank you to every single person who's come forward.
But the state isn't out of the woods yet. Although holiday plans can go ahead, Queenslanders will still have to mask up for another fortnight.
We will also ask you to wear those masks in indoor spaces such as shopping centres and supermarkets, indoor workplaces, public transport. Anyone attending food or beverage establishments, so if you're out there going to a restaurant or cafe or a pub, you must be seated.
Indoor gatherings will be limited to 30 people and strictly no dancing. While it's positive news overall for Queensland, the Deputy Premier, Stephen Miles, took the opportunity to take a swipe at federal government, renewing the call for a national quarantine facility.
The fact that we have 9 new cases today in hotel quarantine amongst returning travellers underlines the ongoing risk of returning travellers, bringing back new strains from right around the world where they are still suffering from the worst of this pandemic. And I just underline again that we would not be facing risks like this if the Morrison government had engaged with us on the construction of a national quarantine facility. Yesterday, David Littleproud said that whatever the states needed, the Commonwealth would provide. Well, we need a national quarantine centre so that we can reduce the risk of returning travellers.
The infection travelled to Byron Bay in New South Wales, with the state reporting 1 case linked to the Brisbane cluster yesterday, although no new cases have been reported today. Dozens of people have been seen lining up in their cars to get tested. It's prompted tighter restrictions for the Easter period, including indoor gatherings being restricted to 30 people, mandatory masks on public transport and social distancing in hospitality venues. For Checkpoint, Paulina Lau.
A lack of sex education and men refusing to wear condoms is leading to unplanned teen pregnancies in Tonga. That's the findings of a new report by the University of New South Wales. As Sarah Jane Hopgood reports, it found conservative attitudes are making it harder for Tongan women to speak up about these issues.
The teenage girls spoken to for this report spoke of a sense of shame about getting pregnant young. For many of them, pregnancy came as a surprise. According to the report from the University of New South Wales, that's because there's a lack of sex education that leads to fear about seeking reproductive health care. One of the report's authors, Dr. Christine Linhart, says knowledge about contraception and reproductive health was quite low among the young women interviewed. Her statement has been voiced.
For a lot of the young women, the first physical symptoms of their pregnancy came as a surprise. It's not that they did not understand that sexual interactions would lead to pregnancy, it's just that wasn't a result that most of them had considered was going to happen.
She says in a lot of cases, when questioned by their parents about a possible pregnancy, most of the girls lied.
This demonstrates the hesitation and fear that they had. Most were incredibly frightened when they found that they were pregnant. They didn't know what to do. Access to maternity services was delayed for most of the girls we talked with because the girls were scared.
Take the Lead, or Taki Moa, empowers underrepresented groups across Tonga to be leaders and to provide opportunities to have their voices heard and respected, particularly in spaces of national decision-making. Chief Executive Officer Elizabeth Gete was not surprised by the report.
If you're exposed to this sort of space working in Tonga, this is just a known fact, and the lack of information is really evident even among some leaders of villages and whatnot. I really agree with the lack of information that's dispersed. We don't have any. It's not being shared, and I guess it's around the taboos and all that stuff.
She says increasing people's knowledge is crucial.
I think education is the key to actually helping address this problem. And not just educating women, there needs to be a strong focus as well on educating men. I think there's a lot of work right now, and you can see with a lot of the women's groups for women, but not so much on men.
The report was supported by Dalitha Project, a non-government organisation for young women in Tonga. The project aims to give young women and girls an opportunity to have a voice and make informed choices. Vanessa Heleta from Dalitha says parents need to be proactive in talking with their children about healthy relationships, their bodies and sex education. Ms. Heleta explained that because the church plays a pivotal role in Tongan people's lives, they too need to actively preach about sexual and reproductive health.
We are always proud of our Christianity, that we should be embracing what God has made, because if God has made us beautiful, and if sex is an ugly thing, then why? God made it in the first place. But everything is beautiful in its own time.
The report called for strengthening existing programs to support youth and promote gender equality and challenge harmful gender dynamics. It also recommended strengthening reproductive health education in schools through consultation first to see if there's an appetite for it before changes are made. The long-term changes recommended include calling for ratifications and legislations on abortion, which is illegal in Tonga. Ko Salajan Hopke tēnei.
It is 23 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Fijian Indians living here are opposing their official classification as Asians and not Pacific Islanders. The 2018 census shows just over 15,000 people identify with the Fijian Indian ethnic group, an increase of about 5,000 from the 2013 count. They call themselves Fiji Gurmit and say labelling them as Asians is wrong. Christine Ravoy reports.
More than 140 years ago, the Leonidas, a ship carrying indentured labourers from India, arrived in Fiji. They were some of the 60,000 who worked for the British on the colonial sugarcane plantations. Today, 15,000 of their descendants live here, and for the past 2 years they have been urging the government to recognise them as Pacific Islanders and not Asians. The word Gurmit refers to this agreement between their ancestors and the British to go to the Pacific. The chair of the Fiji Gurmit Foundation, Krish Naidu, says many of them have never been to India, nor have any links or connection with the motherland. He says young Fijian Indians have strong roots to Fiji and they want to proudly identify that link.
Stats New Zealand have said that a review of classification cannot happen until the 2023 census. So we will still be classified as Asians. We've already been disadvantaged for many decades. We don't want to wait to the 2028 census for that to happen.
The Minister for Pacific Peoples, Aupito Williams-Seo, says while he understands the group's concerns, the classification for Fijian Indians is in line with an ethnographic profile which includes people with a common language, customs and traditions. He says that profile is different from indigenous Pacific peoples.
It's one of those things where they've identified themselves now that the system of government has not acknowledged them. And so those conversations have to be ongoing.
Rotumans have been in New Zealand for as long as their Indian counterparts. Community leader Rachel Mario says Fijian Indians should be recognised as Pasifika along with the Itoukes and the Rotumans.
We have to do what's right. In the case of the Fiji Indians, of course, they're born in the Pacific. They're born in Fiji, they are Fijians. So there's no doubt about that. They should be treated as a Pacifica.
However, Malcolm Andrews of the New Zealand Fijian Association says the term Pasifika is a brand given to people of the Pacific by the colonizers of the region.
And with the brand comes its lifestyle, so the values that we have, the principles, the the belief systems that comes with it, and also the landmarks or the marks that we have amongst ourselves that show our connection via migration.
Mr. Andrews is also a member of the Pacifica Medical Association and suggests the Fijian Indians hold a Talanoa session with other Pacific communities to discuss how best to address their concerns. Dr. Primla Kar is president of one of the largest Indian groups in New Zealand, the Indian Association Manukau in South Auckland. She says Fijian Indians fit both descriptions of Asian and Pacific Islanders.
If people who have been in Fiji for whatever number of years and they want to qualify themselves as Fijian Indians from Pacific Island, I don't think there's a problem in that. Fijian Indians should be qualified as Indians, but if there is a subset where they want to qualify as Fijian Indians from Pacific Islands, I think there's no problem in that.
The move by the Fijian Indian community in Aotearoa has generated a lot of debate online and in the media in Fiji and across the region. Academics, historians and legal professionals have all joined in the discussions with different views. Krish Naidu says he hopes good sense will prevail and he is optimistic there will be change. Mo te hotaka o te ahipunei, ko Christine Ravoy, tēnei.
A US trial suggests the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID vaccine is 100% effective in children aged 12 to 15. The company will now use these early results to seek approval from regulators, including in the US. Freddie Joyner has more.
Pfizer and BioNTech on Wednesday said their COVID-19 vaccine was safe and effective and produced robust antibody responses in 12 to 15-year-olds, setting the stage for them to seek approval in the United States and Europe within weeks, and offering hope for a return to in-person schooling nationwide. Their vaccine was authorized by U.S. regulators in late December for people aged 16 and older. The new study offers the first evidence of how the vaccine will work in school-age adolescents, putting the two companies ahead of other Western vaccine developers in the quest to protect children from the virus. A trial by Moderna to test its COVID-19 vaccine in children aged 6 months to less than 12 years was launched this month, while Johnson & Johnson has yet to begin a planned trial. AstraZeneca in December removed children from a mid to late stage trial of its COVID-19 vaccine in Britain. The Pfizer-BioNTech trial was of 2,260 adolescents aged 12 to 15. There were 18 cases of COVID-19 in the group that got a placebo shot and none in the group that got the vaccine, resulting in 100% efficacy in preventing COVID-19, the company said in a statement. The vaccine was well tolerated, with side effects in line with those seen in the earlier adult trial. Last week, the companies gave the first vaccine doses in a series of trials testing the vaccine in younger children that will eventually go to those as young as 6 months of age. Pfizer's chief executive, Albert Bourla, said the company planned to seek emergency authorization from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, quote, in the coming weeks and to other regulators around the world. He added that he hopes to start vaccinating the younger age group before the start of the next school year.
The New Zealand government has bought enough doses of the Pfizer vaccine to immunise every New Zealander, although there are no current plans for children to get the jab. Before we go, a bit of feedback on the All Blacks. One listener says, sell the ABs before they're worth nothing, as rugby as we know it will be gone forever. And this one on Brierley is Sir, in inverted commas, Ron, a candidate for becoming the first multi-millionaire 501 Oz export, asks Fred. Have a wonderful weekend if you're off for the long weekend. Do be careful on our roads. We'll be back on Tuesday, same time, same place. Catch you then.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A campaigner against child exploitation, Denise Ritchie, says Sir Ron Brierley should do the decent thing and give up his knighthood. Sir Ron has admitted 3 charges of possessing child sex abuse material. The lawyer for a group of Chinese construction workers says they should be released to assist with any investigation rather than being deported. Hundreds of newly released MIQ vouchers have been grabbed quickly, and talks between top players and New Zealand Rugby will restart next week over the sale of rights to a US equity firm. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
We are fed up with inaction. We want to be safe in the city, and we can do this as a community, but we need support from the government, from council, from everybody who has any influence in this space.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
We need them right beside us, and instead of being a watchdog asleep in its kennel, it's a watchdog on the end of its leash.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.